Hello and welcome to the channel. Today we'll be cleaning and doing some maintenance on a Shimano Metanium Mgl bait casting reel. If you are new to the channel and like what you see, do me a favor and click the subscribe button below, and you won't miss out on future videos, and I really appreciate it. So let's get to it here. This is a Shimano Metanium XG Mgl reel. This is one of the higher end Shimano bait casting reels. I don't work on them too often. They're not as common as, say, a Corrado, which I work on quite regularly. It's pretty similar to a Corrado when you take it apart. There's some differences, some upgrades in areas. So we're going to get it taken apart, clean the reel nice and good, and oil and grease, and then reassemble and get the reel working good as new again. This particular reel was used with braided line for flipping and pitching and frogging. So it's just kind of dirty. Nothing's really wrong with it, but we're just going to get it to where it was out of the box, nice and smooth and fresh. So with that being said, I'm going to go over a few of the tools I have with me today. The number one thing you're going to need are some Q-tips. I've got plenty of Q-tips piled up over here. Some paper towels. You're going to go through a lot of paper towels. I have a garbage bucket down here on the floor, which is very helpful. I have this pick tool, which you can get at most hardware stores. This one's from Harbor Freight. This is going to help you get some of the smaller parts out and pull the bearings and such. I have a few small Phillips head screwdrivers. These are just for your standard Phillips head screwdrivers for taking the screws in and out. I have an adjustable wrench. We probably won't use this. I have it on hand just in case. A 10mm nut driver. This is very helpful with all the Shimano low profile bait casting reels. You use it to remove the nut on the handle, which sometimes can be difficult to remove without stripping. This nut driver really makes it easy and keeps you from cross-threading, which is a common issue with those aluminum nuts. And then I have an old toothbrush. I use this old toothbrush to clean the reel. And I've got a little bucket here of just regular rubbing alcohol. Then the other items I have Shimano grease and some high-speed reel oil. This is from Boca Bearing. So, and then I do have one more additional optional item. It's not required. This is just a Dremel tool, and I've made put a Q-tip with some of the cotton removed in there. And we're going to use that to clean the pinion bearing and polish it up nice and good. But you don't need this. It's a completely optional item. You can do it by hand with just the Q-tip, but this makes it a lot easier to have this Dremel tool. So, to get started, let's clean this reel up nice and good. That's the most important thing with any reel, is to keep it clean, because all this dirt and grime that comes from the lake and settles on your reel, that's the enemy of all your bearings and all these moving parts on the reel that really slow you down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a Q-tip, and I've dipped it in the alcohol, and I'm just going to start working around. Now, initially, I'm just going to try and get some of the obvious stuff. And you can see it's already collected on there. And I'm just going to go around the reel and get everything, and then I'm going to start disassembling it slowly to where I can get better access and get more dirt off of these reels. There's just this, like I said earlier, this reel was used for pitching and flipping and frogging. So there's a lot of gunk from that grass built up on this reel. And this left unattended, this stuff can creep into your bearings and creep behind your spool, and it's really going to create some issues for you. Can even get jammed up in this worm gear here in the front and affect your level line. So you just want to get it nice and clean. So I'm going to keep doing that. This one's not too dirty. I actually took a preliminary wipe down of it before I put it away for the year in the boat, so it's not terrible. But what I'm going to do, the first step to disassembly, is we're going to take the spool off by removing the side plate. And sometimes that side plate does not want to come off, even though I've opened it. A little trick here is you need to loosen the spool tension knob here. And once you loosen that, it generally loosens that side plate. Now, this one tends to be, of course, it's stuck because I'm showing you guys. So let's see if I can get it. I'm going to loosen the drag as well. Some of these newer style side plates, they just get stuck sometimes. So this one is really stuck actually. There it goes. Okay, so loosening this spool tension knob, that really helps. I remember the first time I started working on these, I couldn't get one of them off to save my life, and that was the trick. So if you ever get stuck, that's what it is. Don't force it. It's usually something like that. Something just wants to wiggle free. As you can see, there's all sorts of debris in there. That's not good. That spool is spinning on there. There's bearings in there. This reel's gotten some dirt inside of it and some debris, so we're going to want to make sure to clean that out. So I've got the spool here on the side plate. I'm just going to start cleaning those. So again, I just took the Q-tip, wiped it in the alcohol, and now I am going over everything, getting all the dirt off. You can see how dirty that Q-tip is. There's a lot of gunk on there. This is a particularly clean reel, and you're still picking up all that gunk, so you could imagine what a dirty reel would look like. And that's what's slowing your reel down. If you ever wonder why that reel out of the box performs so good, it's because there's no dirt or debris restricting it. Now I've got a lot of Q-tips here, and I'm going to go through a lot. I've even got another box that we'll probably pull to if we need to, but don't be shy with the Q-tips. You're going to burn through them today. And I'm going to shut these brakes off while we're in here. When you're done, you want everything to, when you're testing, when you're done, you want everything to roll nice and smoothly. You don't want brakes restricting anything that might indicate a problem. Sometimes when you're looking for a problem, if you reassembled something wrong, it could just be the brake or the spool tension is engaged. So you want everything free and open so you can see how it's performing. So there we go. We're going to let that spool dry. Alright, let's get to this side plate. This side plate is real dirty. Not gunky, but there's a lot of particulate in there. Almost like grains of sand. There you go, that's all in there. That was restricting the spinning of the spool. And it can get into these gears in here and cause some real trouble for you. Now these Metaniums are a little bit more difficult to work with than a standard Corrado, which I prefer to work on. They've got all these little extra little features that you just make digging around in here a little bit more difficult and not as easy to access. You can see there's a retainer nut on that bearing there, and we're going to have to use a pick tool to get that out, because you're going to want to get that out to get it nice and clean underneath, because all that debris that you're cleaning out of here, it certainly worked its way in there, I'm sure. So as I mentioned, we are going to get this pick tool, and it's important when you're using this pick tool to cover up the top, because that little retainer spring or clip, those things like to go flying across the room, and you'll never see them and you'll never hear them land. So just whenever you're removing one of these or installing them, make sure you've got the exit point covered, because they do tend to pop out and fly across the room. So we're going to set that down here. And another thing I'd like to mention real quick, because I just set down that tiny part there on this towel. A good towel is a lifesaver when it comes to cleaning reels. It holds all your parts. It protects your working surface from getting oil or alcohol on it. So just get yourself an old towel and make sure it's clean, and it'll hold your parts nicely while you're working on it. Now, one other item I didn't mention previously is I have a toothpick here. This is a fatter toothpick. I use this for applying grease, and I also use the back end of that toothpick for pulling bearings, such as we have here. I'm just going to stick that into the middle of the bearing. You can use your pick tool too, but that one's just a little easier with some of them. I'm going to wipe down this bearing, get any debris off the surface. So I'm cleaning the surface of that bearing. Okay, that one wasn't too bad. I'm going to get a clean paper towel to work with. Anything that touches the bearings, I want a clean paper towel because I don't want grease from other parts getting transferred to these bearings. You want oil on your bearings, but you do not want grease. Grease is the enemy of your bearings. It will slow these things down to a crawl and eventually jam them up. So oil your bearings and grease your gears. We'll talk about that later. So there, I've got that bearing. This is just a stock bearing. It's cleaned up. I'm just going to let it sit there to dry. Okay, now on the bottom there's a little pad. Sometimes you can knock them out, but sometimes you got to get in there with the pick tool. This one's being difficult. There it goes. I just got it flipped over and then I'll knock it out. Now I'm going to get in there with the pad removed, and I'm going to give it a good cleaning with the Q-tip, and you can see how much dirt and grime was in there. That's going to kill your bearings. So that's why it's so important to do this. I do mine on an annual basis for anything I've used more than a few times. The benefit of having the winters up here in the north is you have the time. If you're down south, you can do them as needed. If I could fish year round, I probably wouldn't do as much of this as I do. It just kind of a time passer in the winter. Alright, now I'm cleaning up the surface with alcohol, this brass surface. The spool rides on that, so it's important to get that. I'm just going to get everything nice and clean, because even if the dirt isn't on a critical area, it could move into a critical area, so you want to get everything you can. So, and then I'm going to give the toothbrush, just do a quick once over on the side plate, dry it off. We're going to set the side plate over here with the spool, wait for later for reassembly, and then I'm going to get a fresh clean Q-tip and wipe off this pad, this bearing pad. And then I'm going to rub it here on this clean towel and get all that gunk. You look at all that gunk that came off of there. That's not good for bearings. So if you were having issues with casting distance or anything like that, that's probably your culprit. So I've got a clean pad I'm going to set off to the side. Now we're going to get back to the reel itself. Now under the spool, where you took the spool out, under here, that's where that spool's been throwing all that dirty water and weeds. So it's particularly dirty in there. You're going to have to spend some time and get in here and really get after it, because it's going to be caked on every little nook and cranny it can get itself into. These reels that are dirty take a lot longer than a clean reel. The reels I do every year go by much faster. This one's seen a lot more use, or harder use. So this one's going to take a little bit of time today. It's all part of the process. You just take your time and do it right. It's just cleaning, but it is very important. Very, very important. So there, we're cleaning everything on the inside here. You can see there, these two bars at the bottom there, and these feet of the reel really collect a lot of dirt and grime. Next, we're going to remove the level line cover and get into that. But we're going to get as much as we can before we do that. And I'm changing Q-tips quite regularly, because eventually you're just spreading dirt around, so you want to keep a clean Q-tip. It's not as critical on these components, but anytime you're anywhere with a moving component, you really want to change your Q-tips regularly and keep the Q-tip clean. So I'm going to get in here with the toothbrush for a minute, just to loosen everything up, get some stuff that the toothbrush will loosen up some stuff that the Q-tip's missing. And then I am just going to go over it again with the Q-tip to pick up everything that toothbrush loosened up. Now this maintenance and these cleanings, even if you don't want to dig these reels apart, you should do these cleanings, because there's no skill involved to us. You don't need any special knowledge. It's just work. You take the spool out and do a little work, and it can go a long way. You can keep these reels running for a long time. Some of my Corrados, I'm on year 12 and 13 with them, so they really do last quite a while if you take care of them. All right. So now I've got about as much as I could get with the with this worm gear protector on there. So I'm going to take this screw out here to kind of gain more access. So it's just one screw, and again I'm laying these parts out on this towel as to not lose anything, and I lay them out in order. This one's not. This one does not want to go. It's funny, some of these come from the factory and they just pop out, and others just do not want to come free. So what we'll do is we'll loosen this up. I just did one about an hour ago when it popped right out. This one, I'm just breaking the tightness on these screws that hold the side plate on. Hopefully it'll give me a little clearance. So I'm not getting it there. So what I'm going to have to do is take the side plate off. So we'll skip ahead and then we'll go back to cleaning here real quick. So to get to the side plate and remove it, the first step is to remove the handle here. You're going to start by removing the sleeve around the handle nut. So we're going to take this Phillips driver out, and we're going to clean all these parts as we take them out. This is where that pick's helpful. You got little parts like this. Just pop it free like that. And we're going to clean these parts as we take them out. That way when we go to reassemble, everything's nice and clean and we can just keep moving. That's just a quick wipe down. I'm going to put the screw back in it. I'm going to set it back aside and wait for reassembly. Now here's that 10mm nut driver I mentioned. This is where we're getting to that. Is with this handle nut. You can see there's the flat sides of that nut. They're not too wide, so you really got to be squared up on it. And if you're using an adjustable, you can use an adjustable wrench, but you might scratch up the handle and you might, beat up the nut a little bit. So this 10mm nut driver is great because you just slip it on there, square it up, and there you go, boom. Comes right off. They're pretty shallow threads. So I'm even going to clean the nut up. Set that aside. So now we have our handle removed. I'm going to do a wipe down with the Q-tips on the handle. A lot of gunk on here. Tends to build up on the shaft spins around. Again, I'm burning through these Q-tips. It's important to get fresh ones so you're not just spreading the dirt around. And again, this reel's kind of dirty. Doesn't look like it on the surface, but when you dig into it, it's been wiped down in the boat a few times, so you really can't tell how dirty it is underneath because it's got a lot more use than it appears. So now that I'm done with the Q-tip, I'm just going to try and loosen up any remaining dirt particles with the toothbrush. Gonna just wipe down the rubber knobs here. Just gonna get going there. Okay, and then I'm going to wipe down these knobs real quick. And then we're going to set this handle aside for reassembly later. So we are okay. Now this next piece, on most reels you have to be careful here because there's a spring below here. On these Metaniums, this is one of the things that's different about these higher end reels, is it's kind of like this accordion compressed washer thingy that replaces the spring, so it's not as likely to go flying, but still have to be cautious. So I'm just removing the drag star, and then there's that little accordion piece it's kind of like a spring, but it doesn't really bounce much, so it's kind of cool. I guess this is why these are so expensive, because this spring is not a spring. So that's a pretty cool little piece. So we'll set that aside and we'll clean up the drag star. Inside of the drag star can get particularly dirty sometimes, so you want to give it a good cleaning. I'm just going to do a wipe down with the Q-tip. Okay, we're going to set that drag star aside for later. Just going to do a quick wipe down. There's not usually much on here on this little spring thing, but I just wanted to make sure. As long as we're here. Okay, now before I'm going to take this apart, I'm going to do a little cleaning with the toothbrush. There's a lot of debris on there and a lot of gunk and grime, and I want to get it clean before I get down to where the bearings are. So I'm just going to clean up with the toothbrush. And look at that, there was a piece of actual, looks like grass or braid, and it looks like it looks like maybe some braid, a little chunk of something that was wrapped around the handle, so that can really get in your bearings and create some issues. So that's what you're doing when you're cleaning. You're trying to get rid of things like this that can create future issues. So that could be a real big problem in the future. So glad we found that. Okay, we're going to just loosen this nut by hand. And then there's a series of washers. Keep the washers in order. There's going to be the nut, okay, and then there's going to be a flat washer, which is going to have a brass side and a silver side. The silver side touches this silver nut. So I'm going to lay them on the towel here in order. And then these curved drag washers here, these are next, and those are in a particular order. So now I've got those off. I'm just going to touch this up real quick, getting it nice and clean. Okay, set that down for a second. We're going to go back to all these washers and these nuts. We're just going to clean them up real quick with a Q-tip. Then I'm keeping them in order on the towel, so it's a good way to remember the order they go in the install. Okay. Alright. And now these washers are curved, and when you reinstall them, you don't want them to stack evenly on each other. You want them to be opposites so they create a little sandwich. We'll go over that on the install, but just something to take note of. Just a little bit slight bend, and it basically is almost spring loaded when it's when they're smashed together. So there is another washer on there. It's a little tiny one. It's just for the bearing there, and I had to get this pick tool. To be very careful with these thin little bearing washers because they will bend if you force them too hard. So be careful and just kind of, there you go. They will bend and crack pretty easily. Not crack, but just bend and leave a fold in them. So there's that. There's that one. Okay, now we're down to the bearing. There's a bearing here that is just on top of the anti-reverse bearing. There's a regular roller bearing, ball bearing, and we can leave that for now, but we'll take it out here on one of the next steps. Now let's flip this reel around and let's get this side cover off. So I'm going to loosen these Phillips heads that hold this side plate on from the back side, and I'm going to set them on the towel here in the order in which they go. So I'm going to put this one is going to be on the bottom left, this one's going to be on the bottom right, and this one's going to be in the top middle. That way I install the right screw in the right hole on reassembly. They are different lengths. I believe this one has one that's, maybe two that are different lengths. I think all three are different lengths on this model. Most Shimanos have two that are the same and one that's different. This one is 3 different screws, so you do not want to screw that up. So we've got those screws removed. I'm just going to touch up, there's a little dirt where the screw head was covering. Now I'm going to flip it back around and be careful and slowly remove this cover. Why I say be careful, there are 2 springs that are underneath. If you bend them, they'll jump out, but they shouldn't jump out. So here's those 2 springs I mentioned, and I'm going to set those on the towel here. And I'm just going to give them a quick run through with the toothbrush. Just get any grease off them, and I'm going to set them aside for reinstall later. Now, I'm going to set the reel aside for the moment. Now those springs are removed. Set it over here. And generally what happens when you remove this side plate is this sleeve that goes in the anti-reverse bearing will stick to there, so I've had to flip it over and take it out myself. Now this reel has a lot of grease in it. This could become a big issue, and it's another good reason why you take these apart. There's grease that's worked its way into the anti-reverse bearing, so you want to keep that bearing nice and clean, otherwise it's going to start to fail. So what I'm going to do is first I'm going to clean this sleeve up nice, because you don't want any oil or grease on the sleeve or on the anti-reverse bearing. That bearing can fail if you over grease it. You shouldn't be greasing it at all. It should be just fine as it comes. I just like to clean them. I've never had any fail that aren't over greased. Sometimes the stock ones just have a lot of grease and oil on them, and those are the ones that I see failing. The ones I run dry, I just never have issues with. It's just how I do it. I don't know what the proper way is, but that's what works. So I'm cleaning this, and I'm being careful to keep this anti-reverse sleeve extra clean. I don't want anything to get on there and make it slip backwards. So I've got that all clean. I'm going to set it aside for reassembly. Now I'm going to remove the spool tension knob here. And then there is a bearing in there. This is your spool bearing. But again, there's one of those fun retainer clips. I don't know why they have them in these reels, but there's a lot of grease and gunk built up in there, so I am going to have to remove this retainer clip and get to that bearing, because that bearing needs to be clean. There's no doubt about that. These things are an absolute nightmare. Maybe there's an easier way to do it, but I don't know it. Part of the trouble is you just don't have good access in here. And like I said, be careful when you're doing this to cover the exit point when you pop it out, because it will go flying. This one just, there it goes. And there it goes, it just pops out. So there's that. I'm going to clean that up with a Q-tip, set it aside for reassembly. Now I noticed this one is a different finish than the one I pulled out earlier, so I'm going to make sure to keep it separate and install at the same location. So I don't know why they have 2 different ones, but they do. The one on the side plate looks to be brass, and this one seems to be like a black nickel finish. Now I just use the Q-tip, pop that bearing out of there. I'm going to get a fresh clean Q-tip whenever I clean a bearing, and I'm just going to clean the visible gunk off these surfaces with the alcohol. And again, this part with these spool bearings is much easier on the Corrados. I don't know what the benefits are of this design, but it's not to make them easier to clean, I'll tell you that. So I'm cleaning this on a clean portion of the paper towel where I don't have grease or oil. I'm going to set that there for install later. Now I'm going to get into that where that bearing was housed. Make sure that's all nice and clean. Get everything cleaned up. This may seem long and boring, but this is the important stuff. This is what saves your reels. There's just a lot of gunk on these things. All right, back to the inside where I noticed there was a lot of grease before. I'm going to take and just wipe this grease off, and then I'm going to flip sides of the Q-tip before I get where that bearing is. I don't want to be spreading that grease around. This anti-reverse bearing that's in there, it does not get removed if you can help it. It just sits in there. We are going to take out the bearing though that sits on top of it and give that a nice cleaning while we're in here. And that'll also give us access to the anti-reverse roller bearing underneath. So again, I'm using a clean Q-tip whenever I'm working with a bearing. All right, there's that bearing. All right. So we're into the disassembly process, which includes the cleaning process. We are getting there. Now, I'm cleaning this roller bearing with fresh Q-tips with alcohol. You need to put the alcohol on because the cotton will get pulled into there if you don't have alcohol on the swab. And you want to pull off any debris. There is some yellow residue coming off, which shouldn't be coming off, so that was grease that had seeped in there from the inside of the reel. So everything's looking pretty good now. What I'm going to do before I put this away is I'm just going to do a quick rundown with the toothbrush and some alcohol, because there is a lot of dirt on here. I'm going to wipe down my toothbrush, and then I'm going to move to the other side, loosen everything up, get to some of the nooks and crannies that Q-tip doesn't get to easily. Then I'm going to go back over everything with the Q-tip, starting on the outside. The outside is fairly clean, so I don't want to spread any of that grease from the inside to the outside. So I've just got that. Then I'm going to wipe down the inside here of this plate. Alrighty. Getting it nice and clean, and it'll have some time to air dry while we're working on some other stuff before we reassemble. You don't want to reassemble with all this oil on, or alcohol on here. I just got a fresh clean Q-tip, and I'm just going to do a final pass on the roller bearing and reverse roller bearing and the bearing housing here where that spool bearing goes on the side. Make sure that's nice and clean and nothing got worked into there while we're cleaning the outside. So that's good to go. We're going to set that aside for reassembly. Let it dry while we're doing these other parts. Now that spool tension knob cap that we took off, I'm going to take these little pads out. There's 2 pads in there. And these are actually touching the bearing when it's spinning, so it's important to keep them clean. These ones are particularly dirty. So I wiped them down with a Q-tip first, and you can see how dirty they are. And I've noticed some of the factory ones, the first time you clean them will be particularly dirty and black. I don't know if that's from the material just not setting right and coming off during use. But after each sequential cleaning, it seems to get cleaner and cleaner. So, alright, I've got these. What I'm going to do real quick is I'm just going to wipe them on a clean paper towel, see if I can get any extra. And again, I'm laying these parts in order as I set them aside for reassembly later. That way you have little sections of piles here that when you go to install something, you know, oh, okay, these go with that. And it's in the order they're laid out in. These little grooves hold a lot of dirt. It's not critical to the reel, but as long as we're getting after it, I'm going to get these two. I'm going to go over them with a Q-tip. See if I can loosen anything up with a toothbrush. Get a fresh Q-tip and do a final pass, starting on the inside. Where that bearing's going to go, you want it nice and clean in there. You don't want to be moving dirt and debris around. Should be able to see anything in there. Okay, so there's that. I'll let that dry. Okay, now we've got most of the reel disassembled, and I'm going to show you another cool little tool I make. This is just the bottom portion of a red Solo cup. You cut it off, and what it's good for is while you're stacking all these parts in here, you can set that reel in there like that, and it just keeps it nice and organized, especially when you're going through the reassembly process. So we've got some cleaning to do here. I see a lot of dirt and grime there. That should not be there. I don't know how that's getting in there. If I don't know, that's a lot of dirt, so let's get it out of there. So let's pull these parts off. We don't need this little Solo cup at the moment, but it'll be helpful here in a minute when we're putting everything back together. So these Metaniums are a little more difficult to get the drive gear off, because it's kind of like a puzzle getting it up the shaft. The shaft is one size, then it gets skinny, and then it's fat again. So you gotta kind of come off of this, and then you gotta come off of that one. So we're just pulling all these parts off. Okay, and then here, this pinion gear comes off with this little plastic piece that sits on those posts. And then there's we're down to almost our just our reel frame and a few other parts on there. And we'll clean this up, and we'll clean all these parts up. So the first thing I'm going to do is take the pick tool and get these drag washers out. Be careful with these. You don't want to bend these or break these. These are stock. I generally upgrade to Carbon Tex, carbon fiber drags. These are they give you a little more hold, and they're a little smoother than these stock ones. But on the Metanium, these are pretty good drag washers, so you don't really have to do anything. How I clean these drag washers, I just get a clean paper towel and I just wipe them off. Got to be careful not to bend them, but you don't want to be using solutions or anything. You want to keep your drags as dry as possible. Any grease or oil that can get on them can cause slipping, and you don't want that. So I just wipe them down until I quit seeing the black come off in the towel. Just get them nice and dry and let them sit there. Now for the metal gearing and these other plates, we're going to get the Q-tips out again. I start with this. I do a wipe down on each side with the Q-tip. Just get everything loose. Get any of the big stuff. Now I'm going to hit with the toothbrush just to loosen everything up. I do a wipe down with the Q-tip, and then wipe down with the paper towel. And even wipe it on the towel here. Clean portion of the towel. Just get that. There, that's nice and clean. Got it ready to go. It's important to get those clean because the drags do ride on these pieces. Those drag washers we just removed. You need a nice clean surface. You don't want oil or grease on these or any debris. You want that drag to have a good grip and a smooth surface. Smooth, clean surface. So they may just seem like simple parts, but they are important to the whole setup. Okay. All right. This gear is the fun part. I'm going to clean the inside real quick before I get that grease moving around. Just do a quick wipe down. There's some leftovers from that drag washer you can see that I took off of there. So some rubber or whatever came off the drag washer. You want to make sure and get any debris out of there. I'm just doing I'm going to hit this good with the toothbrush, but I want to get all the big stuff off with the Q-tip before I get into that. So there's that. This towel's getting pretty dirty. So now we're going to just hammer this thing with the toothbrush pretty good. And we're going to go around and get the grease out of the teeth with the toothbrush. I'm going in line with the gears. And I wipe them off every couple passes, because there is a lot of grease in these gears, and you want to get all the old grease out so you can put new clean grease in, because there is a lot of dirt in this grease. Dirt gets into the inside of the reel. If I had to guess on this particular reel, due to the age of it, it's not that old, and how it's dirty, I would almost guess that this has been dropped in the lake, because that's how you get all that debris in there. As that lake water intrudes on the interior of the reel, and then it evaporates and leaves all this debris behind. These particular Metaniums have only been out a few years, so this is kind of what you'd expect on a little bit older reel, but this reel has seen a lot of use. Alright, I'm going to switch paper towels, get a cleaner paper towel. Yeah, look at all that gunk. Get it shiny clean. Fresh Q-tip. Going over it again with the toothbrush, a second pass. Another Q-tip cleanup. Now I'm going to set this in the alcohol for a quick second, just to let it soak up and loosen up any other loose pieces of debris. So then we have these two pieces, the pinion gear and the little plastic piece it rode in on. There's a big piece of gunk on there. Wow. Yeah, where was this reel? Let's say this one went to Florida. This one was flipping grass in Florida, I'd say. Alright. Just grabbed a bunch of Q-tips. We ran through about 30-40 Q-tips already. You're going to go through a lot. It's worth it though. They're cheap. That's nice and clean. We're going to set that aside. Now, the pinion gear. A couple little tricks for this gear that I like. I'm going to clean up as much as I can with some alcohol and a toothbrush running along the gears. Okay. Get it nice and clean. This thing is trashed. Lots of dirt and grime in there. Okay, we're going to make a quick little tool here out of a Q-tip. I am going to pluck off some of the cotton, peel it off. I don't want to pull it all off. I've got to start a new one. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to pull off the cotton and leave just a little bit on there, like I have here. And I'm going to twist it up, put a little alcohol on it. Then what you're going to do is you're going to plunge the inside of this bearing, or this pinion gear. You see all that grease and dirt that gets inside that pinion gear? That's killing your casting distance. So this is really important to casting distance, because that spool runs on the inside of this pinion gear. And when there's all this dirt and debris, that was a fresh Q-tip when I put it in there. That thing was trashed in there. So I'm going to clean that up. Look at all that dirt. That's killing your casting distance. Killing it. So now I've got that cleaned up. I'm going to put a Q-tip along and clean up all these gears. Being careful not to leave cotton behind. These gears tend to pull the Q-tips apart, but you do not want to leave cotton on your gears. Cotton's not good for when gears come together, especially when you add grease to it. So I'm cleaning it up here with the toothbrush. Now here's the optional item I mentioned earlier, this Dremel tool. It's the same Q-tip with the cotton removed like we just did to clean the inside. I'm just going to use a little power to clean the inside now, so I'm going to put a little alcohol on the tip of that. We're going to put it in there. Be careful, it does get hot if you create a lot of friction. I'm going to work it around on there, and I'm going to flip it around. Alright, so now I'm going to let this pinion gear soak in the alcohol for a minute. Just remove any of the other, work anything else free, and while that's soaking, I'm going to go to my reel frame here, and I'm going to clean off as much as I can with this toothbrush. As I mentioned before, this particular reel is pretty dirty in here with dirt and grime. So I've loosened all that up. Now I just press the thumb bar down. Be very careful. I'm going to warn you when we get to this part, but if these screws are removed from this pinion bearing here, you do not want to press that thumb bar, because this is spring loaded and it will shoot all these pieces across the room and it'll come disassembled. So I press the thumb bar to get access to some different areas while we're cleaning, but if you've taken off those screws, do not press that button. It's the ejector button. Okay, we're back to cleaning this side plate, or this frame. So we're going to remove this worm gear protector that didn't want to pop out earlier. We're going to pop that off real quick. Just there it goes. Some of them come off easier than others. That one just had a little hitch in it. So we're going to go back to cleaning with the Q-tips, and we're just going to get under everything that we couldn't get to before. There's a lot of gunk on here. Lots of gunk. It's important to get, it's important to get all these moving parts on this level line clear, because they're moving and this debris will just slow that down and make the reel not smooth, and it's going to have to power through that dirt while it's trying to move along that track. So you want to keep it free and clear of any debris. They really don't make it easy to clean the stuff. Still getting a lot of dirt on my Q-tip, so I'm not going to stop. Sometimes I'll spin this worm gear around and clean different sides of it. I'm not going to stop till I don't see the dirt on the Q-tips anymore. Still get dirt on the Q-tips, so I'm going to keep going. Again, I'm going through these Q-tips like crazy. Just keep switching them out. Get the toothbrush in there, loosen up some of the smaller stuff that's hiding in the cracks. Okay, good as new. Pop that thumb bar up, get a little access in there. Just a lot of cleanup. A lot of cleanup. All right. And this is the part that's work. The reassembly goes pretty quick, but the cleanup is what takes the time. Okay, got that looking pretty good on that worm gear. That side plate's pretty clean, or that frame rather. So I'm going to set that there. I'm going to go clean out this cover. This cover is absolutely filthy. I don't know why they put all these little cracks for dirt to settle in. It could just be a flat surface, but I guess that's what it is. So I've washed that with the Q-tip. Now I'm going to loosen everything up with the toothbrush. Alrighty. Quick pass with the toothbrush, or with a Q-tip after the toothbrush. We've got this piece shining again. Set it aside to dry off. Now we're almost ready for reassembly, but what we're going to do first is the main gear that I was soaking in the alcohol. I'm going to take that out and dry it off. That way it's ready to go here in a minute when we need to add grease and reinstall it. So I'm going to wipe it with the Q-tip, and then I'm going to roll it on a paper towel, a clean paper towel. Is what I should be doing. Caught myself there. Clean paper towel. So then I'm going to set this aside to dry the other parts. And we're also going to remove the pinion gear from the oil, or from the alcohol. I keep calling it oil today, I don't know why. So I'm using this pick tool to remove the parts from the alcohol. You can just grab them, but there's that pinion gear all nice and clean and shiny that we cleaned up the inside of earlier before. I'm going to stand this part vertically to dry it off and make sure everything runs out of it. Okay. Still some puddling. Get rid of any puddling. Still a black speck. Black speck of dirt. There goes that. Alright, those are set aside to dry. Now, on this frame, I mentioned this spring-loaded thumb bar contraption here. So when you press the thumb bar, it's spring-loaded, it's under tension, and it rides on this track, and it pops down. Okay? When these two screws are removed right here, if you pop that sucker down, this whole assembly's coming off, so you got to be very careful. Now I'm not going to take this whole assembly apart and clean it today because this one's not too bad underneath here that I'm getting scrubbed up. I've been sliding it up and down manually and getting different areas. But what I am going to do is I am going to take these two screws off and clean that bearing, and you need to be very careful when you're doing this. I would not proceed past this point with the disassembly unless you're comfortable reassembling. It's kind of tricky, especially you've got this piece here that connects to the thumb bar. You've got this plastic piece, you've got the bearing, and you've got the bearing retainer, and this slider piece, and this little plastic slider that goes on there, and the spring. So there's a whole lot that's interconnected and spring loaded, and it all kind of has to work together in harmony. So taking it apart, if it pops off, it's not the easiest thing in the world to do. I've done it several times and it's still a chore. So what we're going to do is put this in that little red solo cup I mentioned earlier that I've cut down, and I'm just going to loosen these with the Phillips head. I've got them both loosened, so I'm going to take it off. Bearing retainer. Screw fell. I try and lift them out, but sometimes they fall. You can't help it. So there's that. So we're going to clean this little piece here. This one's actually pretty clean, so we're not going to do too much to it. And set it aside for reassembly because we'll be reassembling it here in a second. Okay, before I remove the bearing, I'm going to take a fresh Q-tip. I'm going to very carefully, when this is removed, you need to be very careful because this whole assembly can pop off at any time if you move it the wrong way. It's got a little tension to hold itself on there, but once it comes off that lip there on the side, it's going. So, here's my screws. There's both my screws. Set those aside for later. Okay, now I'm going to carefully take the pick tool. See how easy this bearing is to pop out. Usually it's snugged in there pretty good. So if you notice, I'm holding this down while I'm pulling against the bearing. I'm going to hold that there and there just so this assembly does not move, and you do not want to press the thumb bar while you've got these screws off because they will go flying. Sometimes when I have issues, you can come in from the back side. I'll use the back side of a screwdriver to get that bearing started. You can see it's coming out a little bit. It doesn't quite want to go. I'll pop it back in there. Oops. And there it goes, kids. That is not good. Alright, well, you're going to see how to put this back together today. Like I said, it's not something you want to do, but as long as we got it off, I'm going to clean it up and put it back together. Didn't plan on doing this, but whenever it pops off like that, I just use this as an opportunity to clean it up. Alright, these parts are clean. Little thing to watch for is this little plastic foot here on this piece. It slides off pretty easily, so just keep an eye on it that it doesn't fall off. Just be aware of it. And also take note of how that spring is positioned in there. There's a long side that goes into the hole in there, and then there is a short side that sticks up like it is. So I've got everything nice and clean. You can move this thumb bar around now that you've got everything taken apart. Okay. I will take this out just to show it to you. So you see the spring has a long side and the spring has a short side. So there's the short side and there's the long side. The long side goes down into the hole, the mounting hole. So I'm going to set that there so it doesn't run away from us. And let's pop this bearing out if we can. Yep, there it goes. Of course, now it wants to pop out after everything's disassembled. Okay. So now you pretty much, that's the frame down to the studs except for the drive shaft. And that's just held in by a couple of screws, but I don't get into those unless I'm having issues. So here, I'll clean this bearing. Okay. I'll wipe it clean. There's a little bit of dirt on this part, so I want to clean that. Alright, let's make sure the bearing is going. It's nice and clean. Okay, now I'm going to add a little oil to this bearing. This bearing is only engaged when the reel is not casting, when you're reeling. So the speed is not a factor on this bearing. I like to run my spool bearings dry for casting distance, but any other bearings that aren't engaged during casting, I run oil just for dependability and durability. So here, adding some more oil. I've installed it. Here comes the fun part. Okay, for this you're definitely going to want this solo cup just to hold everything together. It may take a couple tries. I'm not the greatest at this. Like I said, I only do it when I have to. So you'll notice, okay, there is a little stud coming out the bottom, and there is a hole for that stud right there. And then on the top, there is a post where this plastic piece goes in. It all has to be installed. Well, first we need to install this spring with the long side down. Getting ahead of myself here. So there's the spring, and I'm being careful to not lose this little plastic piece on the bottom here. It will work without it, but I'd assume they put it on there for a reason. The Corrados do not have this, so maybe this is one of the fancy upgrades, is this little plastic piece of tubing. So that's what you're paying for right there. So I'm going to slide that through the spring, through that hole. Then I am going to, this might be tough for you guys to see, I'm going to put that little stud on the bottom into that hole. Oh, this does not want to go. And now I'm holding that very firmly with my hand. There's a lot of tension on that system right now. I've got that spring down. So I've got that little post in this hole on the piece that connects the thumb bar. Now I'm going to add the plastic piece, and I've installed it. I pressed it down. That went fairly smoothly. It probably won't go that smoothly for you the first time, but that's how you're supposed to do it. Now what's going to happen is this piece is going to be spring loaded and spin on there. But before I spin it, I'm going to put a touch of oil on there. I don't remember if I did or not. It looks like I did. So I'm going to install this bearing retainer before I let go of anything. Oops. And the trick here is getting with one hand on here. I can't imagine how they do this in the factory. They must have special tools or something. Anyways, I'm going to get this screw started. Get this screw started, and I can install the bearing retainer. So So here's a little trick. I'm having a little difficulty getting that screw started. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little grease. I'm going to dip that screwdriver in the grease, the head of that screwdriver. Got some grease on it. I'm just going to spin it around, wipe it clean. So now there's grease in the Phillips head. So now I can take my little screw and I can stick it in there, and that grease is going to hold that screw on the screwdriver. Oh, it did for a second. So now I'm holding it with that grease. It's holding it straight, and I'm going to start those screws. So that's really how you do it with one hand. Little grease trick. Okay? And then I am going to put the retainer on there and tighten one of them down. There, it's cinched down. Going to get the other screw. Oops. Hopefully you guys can see some of this. It might be tough. I'm going to take the screw, the other screw, and install it. And they're threaded. They'll stop. You can go. You'll feel them stop. I mean, the threads fit perfectly for the length of the screw. So there, it's reinstalled. I just want to check a few things when I reinstall. Make sure the spring is pressed fully down into the hole. You don't want it sticking out. It may do that under pressure. Make sure you got this little boot on the bottom of here. Just make sure you didn't install it sideways like I did. If you'll notice, these two posts, I wasn't paying attention. When I picked it up, I put these two posts need to be here and here, because that's how the pinion gear runs. So worried about you guys seeing it, I wasn't paying attention to it myself. You guys probably still didn't see it. Okay, so popping that out. I see I just jumped that around. I should be more careful until I get the screw back tightened. Okay, there's that. Now you see these two posts are not in the way of the gear. So that's why they need to be that direction. So I've got my other screw. Could edit that out, but I think I'll leave it in because this is a nightmare. Alrighty, so those are threaded in. And we have the post in the correct position this time, so good for us. So there, you can see it works fine. That's how that works. Now, the reason you take that down, and I wasn't planning on doing it, was there can be dirt and debris built up under here, and that will get in the way of the your thumb bar depressing properly. So you may have some older reels that you'll press the thumb bar down and you'll go to cast and it engages real quick, and if it happens persistently, that's usually what it is. There's some obstruction here under this flat piece of steel, and it's usually dirt, grime, or grease, or both built up, and that thumb bar can't fully depress or move as easily as it needs to. So you need to keep that nice and clean. So there we are. We're ready to start reassembling. We've already got everything headed in the right direction. Let's start by reinstalling this worm gear protector. This is one of those things that's just so much easier on a Corrado. I don't understand why they made things. I'm sure there's some performance benefits, but I don't know why so many things are so difficult on this reel to work on. There, I had to press it from the inside to get it to pop in there. So now it's in. And there was a screw we're going to reinstall on the opposite side. Okay, so that's in there nice and tight. We're going to get back to the other side, lay the frame in the little solo cup, and to start the process, we're going to grab the grease, and I'm going to grab a toothpick. This is not necessary. I just do it just because. Just put a tiny bit of grease on these plastic gears. It doesn't really do anything. It may make them smoother in some people's minds. Just as long as I'm in here, why not? That's how I feel about it. So, okay. Then the next is going to be this, I don't know, sprocket looking gear thingy here that the drag rides on top of. We're going to pop that down. Now this is a little harder than the other reels, the Corrados and such. The Corrado's just set in there, but you've got to spin it until it fits perfectly in that square. There it goes. It's perfectly in that square at the bottom. It's not the easiest thing. It doesn't just slide on there. So now we're going to drag. Make sure your hands are nice and clean before you touch the drag washers. We're going to grab the smaller drag washer. It's going to slide right onto there. Okay. We're going to set this aside for the moment. And we need to grease our main gear. We've made sure that it's nice and dry. We let it dry for a little bit. And how we're going to grease it is I'm going to take some grease on a toothpick. I'm just going to go around the outside and keep it nice and flat. And I'm going to run it into the gears and kind of comb it into there, just rubbing it across. Now, some of the real experts say you're only supposed to put grease on half of the gear. I kind of lightly grease the whole gear. Like I said, I'm going to rub it into, and I'm picking out anytime I see a piece of black dirt in there, I'm picking it out and wiping it off. So I'm going to go around the whole gear and then I'm going to wipe off the excess. That's very careful, or very important when you're at this stage, to keep everything clean and neat, and because anything this grease touches will stick to it. So you don't want to set it down on anything with a clean paper towel. Oops. It's a little tight here, trying to show you guys. A little tighter than I usually work. Okay. Now don't worry about it being perfectly even. You just want to get the excess off, because when these gears run on the pinion, when this gear runs on the pinion gear, it's going to spread everything out nice and even. So I'm going to take the clean side of this paper towel and I'm just going to wipe off the excess around the edges. And then I'm going to wipe the back side, and then this is very important. I'm going to wipe this top edge, but what's very important is the inside here. A little bit spilled over on the inside. I'm going to polish that down with this dry Q-tip and make sure this is where the drag runs. So you do not want grease on there. Your drag will be slipping with that grease. So I'm going to polish that down as much as I can. Okay, there's that. Wipe my fingers. So now I can pop this onto, and be careful, don't just force it on, because there is this little hitch in the shaft here. You don't want to catch that edge, so you kind of got to line it up properly. All right, so now that's in there. With our clean hands, I've wiped my fingers here to get that grease, because you don't want grease on your drag washer. I'm going to set this in there. Some people do say to grease your drag washers lightly. I've just found it to be too inconsistent with moisture and with grease application and temperature changes. So this is just more consistent and I can count on it. So that's why I say don't put grease on them. They could potentially stick, but with these higher end drag washers, it's less of an issue. So we're going to put this other plate. And again, you have to be mindful to line it up. It doesn't, see, it just slid in there. It's got the little notch there. Now the inset side on that goes down. There is a little divot, so the top is flat and the inset side is face down. And then we're going to get this sleeve, this little anti-reverse sleeve, Be careful not to touch it with anything contaminated on your hands because you want that dry as a bone. You're going to slide that on there, and there's two little keys where it drops right in there and it won't spin. So there's that. And then we have this almost ready to go. We are now going to install the pinion gear, starting with this piece here. And if you look, there's almost like two ramps. Just line up the ramps on the bottom side so they're on the right angle. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this back in the solo cup. Oh, got it sideways. Okay, and then we're going to take our pinion gear and we're going to set it in there. There's a little notch for it. We're going to set it on the two posts. Now it's not in there yet. We have to angle this into the hole correctly and kind of fit the gearing. So it's just slid in. Okay, now that's where we're at for the moment. I'm going to finish the side plate before we go ahead and install the springs. Those springs are a liability once you install them, so we're going to set this aside just for the moment. Of course I tipped it over. Okay, there it goes. There we go. That cup's seen better days. I should cut a new one up. So okay, we're going to have to put everything back together on the side plate, and that starts with the spool bearing. The smaller of the two spool bearings. This little one here. I don't know if you can see that. But anyways, this tiny little, not the tiny one, but the smaller of the bunch. Spool bearing here. We're going to set this in, and I'm going to run these dry. I prefer dry for casting distance. You will need to add oil if they start to perform improperly, especially since these are stock bearings. I generally run AVAC 7 ceramics, which run pretty much forever bone dry. So okay, we've got that settled in there. I'm going to take a clean Q-tip and see if it'll want to go down any further, and it did a touch. Now I'm going to get the retainer clip that came out of there, and this is the black one on this one. We're going to work that in there, and you just kind of push it in, and I'm going to help it along with this tool here. And what I'm doing is whenever I move it, I'm covering it up, so if it comes flying back at me, it's not going to go across the room. So there is a little notch for it down there. It'll work itself into, and there it goes. It's popped down. It's in there secure. So now that's good. Now the spool tension knob needs to be reassembled. We're going to put these two pads back in there. Make note of the divots. I like to keep the divots going in the same direction for casting distance. So the divots that we're facing out, I like to maintain that unless I'm having issues. So you see there's that divot on this side. I'm going to keep it up. Some people say to flip them over, but I have had issues with that. They don't run correctly. Those pads tend to bend and form a certain way, so I like to keep them how they've been running. Now I'm going to turn this upside down to screw on this this cap, because I want those pads to stay in the exact position when I reinstall. You can install it right side up, but it may shift around as you're tightening them and you won't be able to see it. Oops. Just as I did there, I dropped it, and you can see that shifted, so I'm going to put it back dead center. Okay. It's kind of a tough angle here. Okay, I've got it started. Now I've got some tension on it so I can flip it around. So that's in there all nice and tight. And then we're going to install this bearing that goes on top of the roller bearing, the anti-reverse roller bearing. So that is going to go there. I am going to oil it. I'm going to hold off for now. I'm going to wait till it's fully installed, and then we'll put a drop of oil on it at the end because we'll still have access. So I'm going to take what we just worked on here. We've got the side plate ready to reinstall. Those two springs that I was telling you about earlier that are a liability once they're on there, as long as you don't touch them, if you press this thumb bar right now, they're gone. You'll never see them again. So be mindful of that. So I'm going to reinstall. Of course, that bearing popped out. We'll just pop it back on there. And it kind of just wiggles in and sets in, and you'll feel it set. I'll just drop that bearing on there again. Okay. And what I'm going to do is, while I'm holding it together, I'm going to come around and I'm holding this tight here. I've got these screws laid out in order, bottom left, bottom right, and middle. So I'm going to take the bottom left screw, which is the shortest of the bunch, and I'm going to install it. There we go. And then I'm going to take the bottom left, which is the long one with the flat head, the regular oval head. That's installed, so now I can kind of let up a little. And the third screw is the long screw with this kind of boxy cylindrical head. So we're going to install that underneath the spool. You're going to have access here. Okay, now everything's back together. I'm going to put a drop of oil, not too much here, because you do not want oil getting on that anti-reverse roller bearing that is below this bearing. So you just want a little bit, and you want it to stay to this bearing. I'm going to put this little tiny copper washer that's for this bearing. Just carefully slide it down. This one's, you got to be very careful because it will bend. It'll catch some threads and bend. Now we're back to the drag washers I mentioned before that are curved, somewhat curved. You can kind of see it, but not really. But what you want on the first one is you want the curve curving up. And then on the second one, it's kind of hard to tell because it's not too dramatic. You're looking at my hand. So I've got the curve coming down, or up on the first one, and then on the second one, I'm going to have the curve going down. And as you see, when those two are pressed together, there should be two sides where they touch and then two sides where they are apart. So there's a little gap. If you don't have the gap, you've probably got one of them upside down, so you're going to have to redo that. So then we're going to install this flat washer that is copper or brass on the one side and silver. And that goes silver side up, which runs on the back of this nut here. Now the side of the nut with the little ridge faces up to hold the spring, so you're going to carefully thread that on and be careful not to strip it. Let it go naturally. If you have to force it, it's not, you're probably not lined up right, so make sure it goes on nice and easy. If it's difficult to get on, it means you're not lined up right, or there's debris or gunk in the threads and you need to clean it. But if the threads are clean and it's not going, you do not want to cross thread it because it is an issue. That is your drag for your drag system. Then I'm going to add this spring here. It's not really a spring, but it's the Metanium spring, which is pretty cool. It's the accordion, whatever they call it. Then we'll get our drag star. Our drag star, there's a little bit of a wiggle to it. It will set in. This one hasn't quite done it yet. You kind of just wiggle it around, pull it up and down, and it'll find its, when it goes, you'll know. There it goes. Okay, it just dropped in. Now I'm going to hold it down, and I'm going to grab our reel handle. And I'm still holding it down with some good pressure here. And I'm going to pop that on there. And I'm just going to, oops, it popped up. I want to get it started. And then I can start it by hand. That accordion is a lot of pressure pushing back at you. Okay. Start that nut by hand, make sure it's dead square, and it'll go pretty easily when it's square. Okay, so I've got that started. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this drag down just a touch before I tighten it, and you see it just popped in. You get it popped in. If you don't have it popped in correctly, tightening it down a little bit will get it to pop in. It'll line it up. So I've got it popped in. There's a lot more. There was a couple more threads to get down there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to tighten this down. You do not want to over tighten this. That's why this nut driver is so important, because you can really get accurate with it. Now we're going to try something here. I believe you want a flat side. You want the screw hole pointed at a flat side, in the middle of a flat side, or directly at one of the points. So I've put it, we'll see if that works. It works on the Corrados. I don't know about these Metaniums. So I've put it on there. No, it's a little off. So what you do is you just move it a little bit. I'm going to back this off. This is just the tiniest bit. And it will fit. When it's right, it will fit. It will slide right on there. And that will thread right in. That one's not just going. So what I'm going to do is I still don't have it. I still do not have it. So I'm going to back it off. Even though it slid on there nice, something is not. I'm going to put the point right at it and see if that helps. So I've got the point pointed right at the hole. And I think that's the deal with these. Maybe the flat side trick doesn't work with this. Maybe it's the point. So I've got it there. Nice and easy threads. Cinch it down. That one still feels not right to me. So I'm going to try it again. I'm not going to force anything here. And just confirm that the threads aren't messed up. Yeah, the threads are fine because it without that in there, it goes fairly easily. So see what I could do. I think I need to back it off just a touch more. Sometimes you get it right on the first try, sometimes you don't. Just make sure you don't ruin any parts. So this one I can see without the screw in there that I need to come a touch to the right. So that's what I'm going to do is I'm going to tighten it up just a touch. That nut driver really makes this easy. Perfect. That slid on there like a glove. Alright. There's still a little bit. This one doesn't want to go as easily as I think it would. Oh, there it goes. Okay, it's on there. It's on there nice and tight. Okay. Back that drag off now that I have it installed. Okay, now we have our reel almost back together. Just need to put the spool, the side plate back together. So let's put that side plate back together. We've got to, number one, I'm going to dry it out. And then I still have this little pad I need to reinstall. And if you remember before, I want that dimple facing up. That's my preference. Some people say to flip them. I found to keep it how it's been going, get you the maximum casting distance. I will flip them if I'm having issues, but I'm not having issues. And I'm going to run these bearings dry. That is my choice as well. Oil slows down bearings. I'm going to see as long as I can get with dry bearings. This is the brass retainer clip. And I actually see. So I'm going to press it in, get it started. And then I'm going to take the little pick tool and carefully keep my hand on top when I'm moving it so it doesn't fly out. So there we do. We got that reinstalled. The next step is the spool. I'm going to drop oil on the spool. Remember earlier we talked about the inside of the pinion gearing, the pinion gear. That's how you get your casting distance. I just like a little drop of oil to lubricate it. It slows you down initially here, but once the oil dries out a little bit, it really helps. But if you really want to see how your reel spins, don't put any oil on it. So we've put the side plate back on. I'm going to close it up. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cinch down the drag just a little bit, and I'm going to apply a little bit of oil. And like I just said, this oil will slow you down initially, but I want to make sure I've got lubrication to all the areas for durability and longevity. So I'm putting a couple drops in this worm gear here. Not a lot. Alright, and then I'm going to put a drop on each side of the spool. This is definitely slowing you down, but it makes everything nice and smooth. And straight down that drag. And we are back in business. Adjust your spool tension knob. I like to keep everything backed off when not in use. So everything's back to normal. One last little thing, I'm going to put a drop here on these knobs and a drop here because there are bearings in there. It's a bit of a job to get to them. You can get in through this end. I don't like to do it unless I have to, but you see these are spinning like a top, so why mess with them? Oops. I backed that all the way off. Okay. Alright, put that back on there. We've got our drag. And there we go, everything's nice and smooth. Back to normal, nice and clean, good as new. And like I said, I'm going to back that drag off for storage. So that's how you do it. It's kind of cool you guys got to see some stuff that happened that I didn't plan on happening, because that does happen, so you can see how to deal with it. And if you have any questions, just ask them below, and hit the subscribe button below and check out my future videos and follow the channel. We do some reel cleaning, some tackle stuff, and we'll get to some fishing here soon as the season opens up. And thanks for watching.